Travel nursing can bring you to places you've never been before. Tell us your story.
Good morning, it's Rita at the Travel Nurse Channel. Ooh, lots of glare today. How are you? And welcome back. Every Tuesday we're here, or I'm mostly here, talking about all things healthcare, particularly for travel nurses and travelers in healthcare. So we are on Facebook and we are on YouTube, and we're archived. But on Tuesdays at about 10, we're live for about an hour, taking questions, having discussions, and sort of being a reference and home away from home for those that travel and those in the thick of it. I am a nurse. I've been a nurse for like 100 years, actually since the 70s. And many of my friends and colleagues are nurses and other healthcare practitioners, respiratory therapists, radiology technologists, ultrasound techs and MRI techs and doctors and specialty and professors and anything to do with healthcare. And people in healthcare do travel, and the challenges are similar and then unique to travelers. Excuse me, I had an itch, but I'm always here with my sanitizer because I never know who might walk in, or I might walk out before I get to wash my hands. So always sanitizing, and I guess you are too. I hope you are too. Washing up a lot and socially distancing and wearing your mask. Still a great idea. We're not in a particular spiral right now with the COVID, but it is still there. And I'm due for my second vaccine. I was due actually in 2 days, but they moved my date about 4 days out. So I'm going to get my second vaccination on the 11th. Couple of birthdays on March 11th. Yeah, I believe it's the 11th I'm scheduled for. And because I'm not full-time in a clinical setting or in a healthcare environment, I'm just older, and so I get my vaccine. So please do get your vaccine. I know most of my colleagues that are still clinical are vaccinated already. So today's topic is another unfortunate situation, but I've been reading about it and hearing about it, and I have a lot of concerns about it, as you may. Let's get my data up. Okay. And that topic is are our commitments, particularly nurses. Nurses are the largest group of travelers and one of the largest groups of healthcare workers, and they've been called the most dedicated healthcare workers, the most dedicated profession. That's nice, but there are a lot of dedicated professionals out there, and those are doctors and attorneys and teachers and religious people, farmers. I mean, there's a lot of dedicated professions. It's just that nurses comprise a large group and an important group because it has to do with saving some lives. That's part of it, and kicking illnesses butt, kind of, is what nurses do, and they do it full time. Many of them at the bedside, in clinical settings, in long-term settings, in the community, and so forth. So, is our commitment, is the nurses' commitment, travel nurses' commitment, all nurses' commitment, is it being tested? And the answer to that is yes. Was it tested before COVID? Yes. Has it been tested to the limit beyond repair post-COVID? I think so. I think so. In the last 3 or 4 years, I would say some of the data I read from 2017 to present, about 30% of nurses were leaving the profession. And there is a variety of reasons, but I'm sure you would all be familiar with them. Oh, let me get my comments page open. And please know that I'm live, streaming live as we speak. And if you have questions or comments, you want to say hello, you want to add something to the discussion, please do. And even if you would like to chat with me live for others to share our discussion, we can still do that. I have plenty of room on the stream to bring in others to speak. So, you know, I probably have lopsided ears, but every time I look at you, I have to look at myself, and I always see that my glasses are crooked. All right. So, yeah, since 2017 to present, the percentage of nurses that are having to quit for a variety of reasons is about 30%, and we can ill afford that. I posted yesterday on Facebook a little tiny tag about that. It's very, very unfortunate, and nurses don't want to do it. Nurses, many nurses get into this profession and then try out the travel piece of this profession and have great experiences, but they also are being forced to feel like, do I have to make a decision between my life, my having a quality life, and my profession? And that comes with a lot of thought, a lot of guilt, a lot of concerns, and it's very, very distressing. And so I thought it was an important topic to bring up. I know that news organizations and journals, various journals in nursing and healthcare have broached the subject. Wet the whistle. So what's going on? What's going on? Okay, so before COVID, the workplace was becoming increasingly unbearable because nurses weren't feeling supported by their organization, their healthcare organization. Nurses were feeling pushed into unsafe conditions to do more, to be more, to care for more patients, to do it as speedily as possible, and then to so what was I going to say? They're asked to do more, be more, take more patients, and be unrewarded for it. So in other words, you're the same person we hired to work within these guidelines and these ratios of patient-nurse relationship and do a good job. Now we're asking you to do more. And of course, during COVID, that was extended for brief periods when they knew they were just going to be short. More people were being admitted. And let's see if somebody's tuning in here. No? Okay. So that did increase. So for example, at our local district hospital, a telemetry unit was accustomed to taking 4 patients and taking really good care of them, and were pushed to 6. And sometimes the charge nurse was taking them, so they kind of lost out on having an available leader, because the leader was working alongside taking 4 and then bumping it up to 6. Same with respiratory therapists. Whatever their guidelines were for patient care, for a number of patients on respirators, number of patients needing respiratory treatment, that got bumped up. So what happens is you're very frustrated because you're not able to do your maximum for your patients, and you're feeling unsafe. And nobody wants to feel unsafe. You're professionals. You're carrying licenses and certificates, and you went to work wanting to save lives and provide a quality of life for patients with disease and illness and accidents and so forth. And then you really can't do your job because of the circumstances. So that's not good. What happened before COVID that is still existing is that bottom lines were talked about. You know, cost. Insurance is sky high, and the cost of running businesses has increased over the years. We're in the 21st century, and so we need you to do more. And because that's a big group, nurses, that was a place to start to cut. And so what was happening, maybe 10 years ago it started, is older nurses were being asked to leave and retire early and et cetera, and move them out. LVNs took a big hit. LVNs in California used to be part of the team of nurses in hospitals, and they kind of just went to PCTs or CNAs, patient care techs, certified nursing assistants, and started moving a lot of LVNs out of their positions. A lot of leadership positions were scaled down. So a lot of nurses were being asked to leave the profession, leaving the nurses in place with, instead of having somebody in charge or supervisor, that supervisor was gone, and maybe they had another leader wear 3 or 4 hats. So when you're wearing many hats and being asked to do jobs that weren't in your initial job description, how efficient can you be? So those stresses were already there, and now here comes COVID, and we've got more patients, and they're very, very sick, and they require a lot of physical care. And what was happening at the beginning of last year, about this time, the beginning of March, late March, is that we didn't understand the disease. It was a new one. It was kind of unclassified. Our leaders in government didn't have all the information, and there was a lot of fear. We saw a lot of people die in Italy. We're getting little bits of information from China. The nursing homes took a hit in a couple of places, Washington, New York. People were devastated. People were scared, and so hospitals and nursing homes and so forth were forced to make decisions without enough information. They were saying to their staff, well, wear your mask as long as possible. Oh, if you're not in the ICU, if you're not in the operating room, and we don't know whether the patient has COVID or not, you don't get an N95 because we don't have enough N95s. Those are the protective equipment that protect you from small particles like tuberculosis and COVID when it got here. So, but there weren't enough of those. And then we were asked to be using your mask as long as you can. Well, that doesn't feel safe. You're wearing a paper mask. After it gets damp with a few droplets, it's really not that effective. So the requests were not, they didn't make us feel secure. And they seemed unlike nursing as we knew it and healthcare as we knew it before COVID. Here's another piece that kind of floors me. I was not in the clinical area. I've been home for since about 2018. I've done minimal paid clinical work. I was an administrator at that point, and so I was relying for information from my colleagues and from the news media and from speaking to people that were working in the hospital and hearing that they were not being tested. The nurses and the doctors were not being tested. Some were wearing masks, some were not. Some were asked to reuse their masks. My friend who's a respiratory therapist was asked to take her mask home in a brown paper bag and bring it back to work when she came back. They didn't say anything about sanitizing it, keeping it out in the sun, anything like that. And then they ran out of brown paper bags, and they said, okay, you can throw them out now. Well, who wants to throw it out if they don't think they're going to get another mask? And at that point, the hospitals weren't seeing as many COVID patients as they are now. So imagine the distress, imagine the frustration, imagine the concern about not having enough PPE, not having enough information, being told to do something one day or 1 week and it changes the next. And now add this to the factor. You care for your patients. You go into work planning to save lives and to offer comfort and to be at your patient's side. And you do everything. You do everything in the ER. You do everything on a med-surg unit. They get worse. They go to telemetry. They wait in telemetry on a ventilator for ICU care, and you follow them, and you care for them, and you love them. You start loving your patients, and you lose them. And I don't even want to talk on a video about how devastating and how ugly some of these cases become. But you know what COVID can do. It can ruin your circulation. It can damage your heart. It can do a complete organ failure. What a lot of the practices are is proning patients, because that seems to be the only way they can. What are we seeing behind me? Oh, there's my borrowed guy. That's a learning tool for my professor friend. But I just seen that little red. I'm like, what's that red? So they're prone for many, 16, 18 hours a day, and with poor circulation and difficulty breathing, and what my colleagues are reporting to me is devastating. They lose weight, they become necrotic in places you never think of before, like lips and noses and ears, fingers. So what is happening? So wonderful. I don't know why it's so itchy around my mouth. What does that mean? I know when you have an itchy nose, you're going to get in a fight. Okay, I'm touching myself, touching my face. I'm going to wash my hands again. Okay, let's stop touching. Stop touching, Rita. So what does that do to the healthcare, the traveler, the nurse, the therapist? What does that do to their mental state? All that frustration, all that concern. Nurses are ingenious and dedicated and great at brainstorming. I've talked to travelers that said, we thought, well, let's not bring it home to our families. Let's find an apartment where we all go to before we go home to our families. Let's stick together on this and, have shared living spaces and social spaces and protect our families. Staff nurses got together and did that. Travelers got together and did that. They care. They care. They care about their patients and they care about their family. So they were juggling that. How do I take care of myself? How do I take care of my family? How do I take care of these really sick patients with this really communicable disease? And they were coming up with some answers, but in the workplace, they weren't getting the support they felt they needed. They were being traumatized. They were being called in. So here's a story about a friend of mine who actually got called in for an extra shift, 12-hour shift, and said, well, I can make it. I can do an extra 10-hour shift. Did an extra 10-hour shift, had COVID patients, was doing a lot of lifting of obese patients with the COVID and proning and, with all the tubes and the ventilator tubes and the IV drips, et cetera, and strained her back, which she's a tall gal and has had some issues in the past, and just her back went into spasm. So she reported that to her supervisor, who said, oh, I'm so sorry, and proceeded over the next 3 or 4 days not to say, did you write an incident report? Have you seen a professional? Are you getting treatment? Stay in touch. I want to know how you're doing. No, proceeded over the next few days, since their form of communication, I think, was texting or email. So that's what, in her facility, what direction they went to. They said, regardless of what happens when you get in here, always check your text, because that's how we're going to communicate as a team. And proceeded over the next few days to continue to ask this individual to come in for overtime, which may have been kind of a group blast, but how does that make you feel? Like you're just part of a group, you're not even being looked at, and you've just suffered an injury, and you want to help your team. So then you have to say, no, I have an appointment to see the doctor. I'm not doing too well. Moving is very difficult. Sleeping is very difficult. There's definitely been an injury, and as soon as I can, or if you want to email it to me, I will fill out the incident report, because I just made it through that shift and went home in pain. I didn't fill out any paperwork. Anyway, so those are just kind of some of the occurrences and issues that are happening. So if 30% of the population was quitting before COVID, and you add additional COVID stressors that I've mentioned, caring for your patients and seeing them die, caring for your patients and seeing them do increasingly poorer and poorer till they die, being able to, not being able to connect with family members and so forth. It's we're running on empty. It's a feeling of loss, compounded by loss, compounded by lack of support. So this is a trauma situation. This is I liken it to what soldiers go through. They go and they live this life. They're doing dreadful things in different cultures, and it could be changing from day to day. You're in the mountains today, you're on the beach tomorrow, you're in the desert the next day. You're being tested. You're being tested. And so your mental state and your physical state, your emotional state are all being tested. And the only thing, other than evaluating it, and you have to take care of yourself. We've heard the term self-care now over the last couple of years. Self-care is very important. So you have to take care of yourself, because if you're not okay, if you're not healthy, if you're fatigued and traumatized and stressed again, and now it's post-traumatic stress, you have to do something. And so the only thing, I think, that little glimmer of hope, that little possibility that things will get better, is to communicate. Communicate to your recruiters if you're traveling, communicate to the leadership on the assignment, and make reasonable requests. So there was a nurse that I read about, oops, almost touched, did not touch, that I read about that had been a nurse for 40 years. And she had some health issues. She had some cardiac issues when the pandemic occurred. And she'd already had surgery and had a stent put in. So that's good news, a little better circulation for her heart. And she requested reasonable accommodations. As COVID came into the picture in March, and she was working in an acute facility, but had just recently recovered from her own cardiac surgery, she requested reasonable accommodations away from COVID, because she just felt like she wasn't the strongest candidate. She was a vulnerable candidate. They didn't have enough information. They were asking, in some cases, to not wear masks, to not scare patients by wearing masks. And she didn't get a response from her leadership. So no response is almost like a negative response. It's like you don't care enough to respond to my reasonable request for, safe accommodation. So, I mean, there are many jobs that need to be done by nurses, by therapists, by techs. So even in an office setting, there are, you look at your staff and you see, well, we all have to answer the phone. We all have to do this or that. But some of us are better at computer inputting. Some of us are better at, customer relations. So you make the majority of the job within that area of talent. So this nurse could have been fantastic at many things, but keeping her away from the acute COVID patient or the COVID patient in her time of physical distress was a reasonable request, and it was ignored, and she eventually quit. It's so sad. It's so tragic. So what else do I want to say? I'm getting frustrated thinking about it. So yeah, this lack of consideration to such an important part of the healthcare team is put nurses in an impossible position. And the nurses whose stories I've read that went into this profession loving it, that were enthused. It seems odd to people that aren't nurses, but nurses, we know. I've been talking to nurses for the better part of my adult life. I'm in my 60s. I've been doing this since I was in my 20s, so over 40 years. We love what we do. We're crazy people. We are energized. We are energized in the best of times and the worst of times. If it's a code, the adrenaline's running. The skills are lining up in your head, If it's bedside care, just simple, assessments and starting IVs and making beds. And we love it all. We go into work each day wanting to save lives, wanting to even comfort people at the end of their lives, we're people. We're people persons, and to leave something we chose and love, and have made a part of our life, like me, for 40-something years, to consider leaving it comes with great, great, great sorrow, comes with guilt, comes with distress. But on the other hand, the self-care, if you've evaluated everything, if you've reached out to your leadership, I'm sorry to say, you cannot function running on empty. You cannot function without support, without mental health attention. So leave if you must, but it's a big concern because less and less, it's a kind of a vicious cycle. We've talked about this on some of our episodes, that there's a need for nurses in so many areas, including education. So how can we educate nurses if we don't have nursing educators? So we're losing out. We really, I'm really compelled now to join an organization to see if I can help. I think I will be looking into that, let you know where I go with that. But I feel like when I've talked to my colleagues, therapists and nurses and professors and educators and all of them, are they providing mental counseling? Do they have anybody available, that you could stop by on the job or on your day off? Are there open doors to meet and work on healing? Because we need it now. We're a year into this pandemic. We're many years into nurses reevaluating their positions and getting out of the acute setting because it is so stressful and they're doing too much. They're being asked to do too much. they just say, do more, we need more, and there's really nothing in it for you. And it's not working. It's not working. So anyway, when I asked that question, the answer, I said, well, are they bringing in professionals? Is there somewhere you can go for your, mental health? And they're like, no, nobody's talking about it. Nobody's addressing it. Of course, my circle is small. I'm just here in Southern California, and most of the people I talk to are in this area. So if you're in Minneapolis, or if you're in Oklahoma or Hawaii or New York or Boston, if you're doing something different, I would love to hear from you, because we are, our commitment is being tested. Our nursing commitment, our healthcare commitment, our travelers have stopped traveling. Nurses have started quitting or going to, telehealth or less stressful positions, and the guilt and the shame and the sorrow and the idea in a profession of having to choose between your life and your job is we've reached a critical crossroads. So I'm such a Debbie Downer. I really, this is 2 subjects in a row. Yes, somebody is saying there needs to be more nurses and more doctors. Yes, and if we're losing them and not enough coming in, and then you don't have the educators, we're kind of in this vicious cycle of not a circle. There's a circle of a strained situation, So anyway, so we've got about 15 minutes left. I'd love to hear from you. I think I need to come up with a joke or something. So I don't know. What did one hot dog say to the other hot dog? It has nothing to do with healthcare. Hello, Frank. That's a joke I always keep in my back pocket for kids, because most kids know what a hot dog is. Yeah. So that's the situation, Well, I'm not hearing from a lot of people, and so I'm hoping you're resting and recuperating and rejuvenating. And if you're working, bless you, thank you. And if you want to talk about this subject anytime, you can call me, 800-737-6518. My name is Rita. I'm a nurse, and this is the Travel Nurse Channel, and we talk about all things travel. There's actually, many of our episodes are good news. Travel for nurses has been and still is an exceptional way to do your job, to take your profession and your talents on the road, to meet new people, to have new adventures, and to do what you do well. Travel nurses often have concerns. Then they do that first 13-week assignment and they find, wow, I liked it. And they do it again. And those are the travel nurses I've talked to over the years. And it's pretty cool. I did something close but no cigar. I was a per diem nurse, and I traveled to maybe close to a dozen different hospitals, some nearer, some further, within, anywhere within 15 to 30 or more miles. So I had all these little alma maters, maybe I'd spend a week at this district hospital and do a couple of shifts there. Oh, my camera. I lost you there for a minute. Let's get it over to the right spot. Hello, people. Sorry about that. I fiddle around and my feet hit the wires. I apologize. Not quite centered, am I? No, still not centered. There we go. So I, I kind of know, and then I clinically counseled nurses that traveled, and they were traveling to lots of places in California and Hawaii and throughout the states, and I learned from their experiences. Um, there's many positives to traveling. You learn, you know. So, oh, I wish I could remember some of the details. Like, I did it this way for years and years and years, and then this other traveler said, "Try it this way. It's so much easier." Oh, it had to do with I think it had to do with female. Okay, this may be too much for travelers that aren't nurses, but it had to do with placing a female Foley catheter. That for years, the way I learned it, you know, many years ago in the 70s, in the 1970s, I became a nurse. Nurses, we introduced the Foley catheter with women lying on their back, pretty much flat on their back if they could. If they couldn't breathe, we'd have to elevate their heads a little bit. But on their back, legs spread, just like you would do a GYN exam. Well, this nurse, this travel nurse taught another nurse, and it came to me that lie them on their side. So much better. Yeah. So, you know, so you learn things. I mean, that's a silly thing, but I take all the tips I can get and pass them on. Don't keep this good news to yourself. Share it. So you learn things. You see new places. You may be from a big city and you go to a rural area, or you may be from a rural area and you go to a big city. You know, there's a lot of exciting cities out there. I just heard some friends of mine are going to go to Cleveland to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Some other friends are going to San Francisco, to a great metropolis with many different colorful areas of the city, you know, financial areas and marine areas and cultural areas. And Northern California also has some of the most beautiful vistas and forests. We have the great redwoods, and we have Sequoia National Park, and we have Yosemite, and just there's so many things to explore. We have lots of coastline in California and Oregon and Washington. We have lakes and beautiful places, and just many things to see and do and learn, and cultures within the United States. So travel offers that. And in the workplace, you get to learn and to teach and to share with a whole new set of colleagues. And there's something really exciting in that, you know. I think if we don't learn something on a regular basis, that's called stagnation, and that's not fun. I mean, there's routine is fun, and routine is comfortable, and but mixing it up is also a pretty terrific thing too. And a lot of younger nurses, they get a couple of years under their belt, and they're looking at their lives and maybe thinking about getting married or starting a family or getting a higher education. And they're like, I got to get the weight of these loans off my shoulders. And so they try travel. And in addition to being able to sock away some funds, they have these other experiences of learning more, of sharing more, and having the adventures of being in different places. So travel does offer a lot. There are some serious issues, and they will test our commitment to our profession. And hopefully, you can stick with it. Hopefully, you can you can communicate with your leadership. You can get the help you need, the time off if you need that, to regroup, to restore yourself, because we need you. We need you. We need you if you're educators, if you're clinical, if you're critical care, if you're, we need all our nurses in all our areas, actually. We can't afford to lose a one. And I guess I don't say it often enough. I have met and known and worked with some of the absolute strongest and kindest and most knowledgeable male nurses, both in the travel realm and in the per diem realm and on staff, military. There's some fabulous nurses out there, and they're feeling the stress and strain of what's been going on over the last few years of being asked to be more and do more and take on more, and to see no end in sight. I talked to a nurse several weeks ago, and I asked about the ratios, because they had sort of, the state or the board of the state of California had kind of waived meeting the staffing ratios, and the time was nearly up in February, and I'll have to look that person up and see did they get back to the ratios that were more appropriate for the best care. And I don't know if they did or not. So, folks, I would love to hear what you have to say. I don't want you to leave. I know you're frustrated. Yeah. There was a report on CNN news station, and they interviewed several nurses, a nurse named Rachel, a nurse named Chow, another nurse, what was her name? Rachel. Who was this other nurse? God bless her. Spoke to nurses in Florida. So CNN spoke to nurses in Florida, Oklahoma, and Minnesota. And then a couple of them made comments. Here's a comment from Rachel. The mental health impact this is going to have on nurses. She's talking about COVID. I don't think we've even scratched the surface yet. So I'm scratching the surface. There's my man. You see him back there? You see my muscle and vessel guy back there? I don't think we've even scratched the surface, she said. That's what she said. That's what Rachel said. What else did she say? Oh, these three nurses that were interviewed all did leave their jobs. And they all said the decision was not made lightly. They've been nurses their adult lives, one of them over 40 years. And all three said they're still overcome with guilt about leaving the jobs during the pandemic, even though they knew they were making the right decision. Oh, see? So that 30% is likely on its way up. So over the last 3 to 4 years, over 30% of nurses have left their jobs. Yeah. Yeah. And what about the nurses that did get COVID? That's not a huge piece of the population, but for example, that nurse with the heart condition, she quit because she thought she'd just be another statistic, another person with COVID, and she might not recover because she already had some issues with her heart. I don't know if she had a heart attack, but I did read that she had a stent put in. So she was either gonna have a heart attack or did have a heart attack, and they didn't respond to her reasonable request for accommodation on the job. Good gravy. All right, folks. I don't have any jokes. You heard my hot dog joke. It's kind of lame, but I care about you very much, and I think you're doing beautiful, beautiful work, and you're so vital. And I know there are issues, and I will continue to bring you as much information as I can. And I promise next week I'm going to have positive stories for you, okay? I'll give you the good news instead of the bad news. And yeah, it's a little bit of a jungle out there. And it was before COVID, and it still is, but solutions are in sight. And solutions begin with communication. And don't forget your chain of command. And when you're traveling, in addition to the people you work with and who supervise and the management and so forth, you've always got your recruiter, you've got your company, they have resources, so they are there for you. Okay, that's all I have to say about that. Thank you very much, and take good care of yourself. I'm going to send you out with our little commercial. I promised you a second commercial, but the second commercial is just like a, rocket takeoff countdown. I'll show it to you next time. It just didn't excite me, so I'm going back to our leaders here and see if we can get another terrific commercial. But this one I hope you'll like. So enjoy our Nurse in a Sidecar, and tune in to Travel Nurse Channel. We're here for you. Call me anytime. My email is Rita, R-I-T-A, at travelnursechannel.com. So if you want to email me with some ideas, stories, if you want to join me when we stream on Tuesdays, please do. And call me, email me, or just check in when we're live on Facebook on Tuesday mornings, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's it. Miss ya. Love ya. Take care of yourselves first. Here she comes. I think.
Travel nursing can bring you to places you've never been before. Tell us your story.